I know a lot of people there listening in my life are thinking about making a jump from a comfortable career, what they're used to, into a creative field. And so your story is very much like that. And so I'd love to tell people about your career journey and maybe some of the considerations around the changes you made.
Yeah, well, so the joke version of it is, well, I'm a stand-up comedian, and I wasn't always a stand-up comedian. I used to be Alice from the Brady Bunch. No, I used to be a law professor. That was Alice's other job. Shouldn't give much of a backstory, but like I did. And that is the typical route to stand-up comedy, which I'm sure all of the listeners are aware that, like, if you want to be a stand-up comedian, generally speaking, you go to law school for 3 years, then you practice for 2 years, then you teach for 9 years, and then you give it up and do stand-up comedy. And people are like, why did you go to law school? And I'm like, I'm setting up a joke I'm going to tell in approximately 14 years. Okay. I'm a planner. So that being the joke version of my real, life trajectory, like all of the facts are accurate because I'm a lawyer and I can't stop. And in terms of the how of it, I mean, it's, I think with these things, and maybe with all things, there's really just particular stories. And I guess, like, as many times as I've like thought about the story and told the story and written about the story and whatever, I think that, like, really the advice piece that I would give, just because I'm always thinking about that, I'm like, yeah, I can indulge and tell my story all day and all night. But like, if somebody's listening and they're like, how do I know, how to make a jump if I want to make a jump? I really want to highlight the pieces that could tell you how to do that. But one thing that I really remember is this was like well before comedy even became something I really knew about for myself or even really otherwise. I mean, obviously I knew comedy existed, but I never really thought about it as a career path for sure, or anything that related directly to me other than like laughing, which I did. But I remember I was in my job, and I had this job being a law professor was considered, one of the really great jobs within law. And it still is. I mean, when I interviewed for my job as a law professor, people were like, this is the best job in the world, best job in the world, best job in the world. Almost like somebody paid them to say that. And I don't think they were being disingenuous, but it's a different story in the sense that people having that job would say that about the job than, for example, working at a law firm. Not to say that there aren't people who love their jobs working at law firms. I have a story I tell about somebody who really affected my life when I was working as a lawyer in practice, and was just like so tickled by his job. And one morning I come in, I was like totally the most tired. I had so many, all-nighters that week or whatever. And he's like, Liz, are you having fun? And not in a being fresh sort of way, in a way like he had a crush on our job and he couldn't not talk about how fun it was. And so he was like, are you having fun, Liz? And I was like, in my head, I'm like, I didn't even think fun was on the table. Like, maybe this is fine. And, of course I was like, yeah, totally. And then I went back to my desk where I was, had to read the emails I was CC'd on and didn't understand for 2 years. But like, in any event, that job, a lot of people, I would say, who are practicing lawyers, at least when I was practicing, it was like normal, to not love it. Again, not to say that that's a good thing, but just like in the realm of the many associates who would not end up being partners and would leave to do something else at big law firms, not everybody loved it. But when I was teaching, it was such a thing that everybody was like, this is the best job in the world. And so I say that because I think that it's relevant in terms of the level of happiness that I might have expected to have in it. I did have a lot of creative freedom in that job. So it wasn't like I was shackled and not able to be creative or whatever. I did have a lot of that latitude in terms of, what I focused on. And yet I didn't feel alive by the engagement that I had with my work every so often, because if I was writing a big paper, I mean, I would write these 80-page law review articles that were pretty intense. And like, I did achieve a kind of flow state in certain moments writing them for sure. And yet I felt that there was some difference between the way that I felt about writing those papers and the way it seemed to me that some of my colleagues who were among the people who said this is the best job in the world felt when they were writing theirs. And I remember taking out my phone and Googling, how do you know what you want? And for some reason, that's coming up for me as the story to share, or the part of the story to share, because I think that moment really, I don't know. I mean, it's a ton of privilege that goes into that moment. And again, like, I'm always conscious of that because I had a really good gig. And I think that sometimes when I've read the stories about leaving your, whatever they call it, like golden handcuffs or stuff like that, the jobs, maybe not always, but the jobs that I've read about are just like I was working 90 hours a week and chained to my desk and all that. And that sounds hard for sure in a certain way. But also, I think it can happen, and it happened to me when I even got closer to and was maybe even living a rough approximation of the dream that I didn't really know that I was like going for at the time. But like, I got to speak at the front of the room and even get laughs. I got to write about mostly what I wanted. And right now, that's what I do. I don't have to talk about law, but then I do. I mean, it's like nobody's making me talk about law when I'm joking about it either. And so I say all of that because maybe somebody finds themselves in a roughly creative position now that for some reason they might not be coming alive in the way that their colleagues are. So that's all, where I was. And in terms of how I got where I am, I mean, a woman I had a crush on asked me if I wanted to do stand-up. I said no. She then was like, well, what about doing it on my show? Figuring she'd be there, I did it. And the first time I ever did stand-up comedy, honestly, I felt like I was having a professional orgasm, okay? Which was like basically a regular orgasm, but I was 100% sure that I was having it. And so on that basis, truly, I mean, a year and a half later, I would leave, And we can fill in whatever details, but I feel like I've been going on for a little. So that's all true.
I love it. And I just want to personally relate to a couple parts of what you're sharing. First of all, making important changes because a woman I have a crush on too. I've tried things for the first time that I'm scared of, like particularly dancing, which is an important thing for me. I got into dance because a woman I had a crush on. Yeah. And then she's long gone, but I'm still dancing. And so things like that, I'm really grateful. And I think that that can be really positive force for change, is following that energy.
Totally.
So it's cool that you started that way. I relate to that really strongly. And I also, I'm reflecting a lot on the change, the way you talk about the change you're making. My stepfather has been a successful lawyer for 30 years, and he just left law to be a nurse.
Oh, wow.
So I'm thinking about how he was serving people. So you talked about your creative energy, how you were still being creative as a law professor. You were writing, which kind of challenged a projection I had, which is law, that maybe you weren't feeling very creative in it.
Right.
But it was about the fun, as what I was hearing too. Is it fun and is coming up for you? And even if you are creatively expressed, or like Steve he was helping people in his law career, but he was called to help a different way. You were you were feeling inspired, like what was feeling right to you was being creative a different way.
Yeah.
And so I'm relating to that. And he was also it's kind of a similar, that golden handcuff, comfortable job. Leaving those jobs really feel like the hardest kind of, to me.
I mean, I can appreciate that it does. It also, like, I remember when I took my teaching job after being in practice, and people were like, wow, you're going to take a really big pay cut. But it didn't matter in that moment. I was just like, what? Because I guess, the practical aspect was, it wasn't that big a pay cut at the time. It was like I was making around the same. The difference is that I wouldn't have the ability to make as much more in the future as if I made partner, which I was never going to do. And so I was like, okay, that seems theoretical and didn't really make an impact. And I guess like, you know, the practical aspect of my leaving my professor job was that I did get a buyout, which I've definitely like talked about before, but like, you know, I'm currently writing the story of that in like pilot television show form. And one of the notes that I've gotten is like, don't put the buyout in the pilot. And it's like, I get it from a literary standpoint because we want to see, you know, the character make a choice that's bold. Yeah. And like having a buyout makes it safe. And I have a thing where it's like, you know, in my stand-up too, not just like writing for screen, is like, I want to tell the true story, but also, you know, as I've gotten like, I don't know, older as a stand-up comedian, I recognize that there are moments that it's like helpful, you know, to take the truth and embellish it, or take the truth and make it a punchline in a different sort of way. So anyway, all of that to say, it is true I got a buyout. It's also true that the buyout, and the technical piece of it is just I had a tenured position. And so in order for me to leave my job, I had to be bought out of my job. I mean, I guess I could have left, but like the technical piece of it was just my school at that time was having this budget moment that caused the dean to offer buyout packages to all tenured faculty. I was recently tenured. And so despite the fact that a moment like that isn't really designed for someone in their early 30s, as I was at the time, you know, to save money and like the budget or whatever, it did technically apply to me because of my recent tenure. And so I took it because it lined up, you know, in the stars with this like moment that I was having in my life. And I had thought about leaving, but I didn't think about it in like 100% real terms because I was scared. You know, I mean, I had a job for the rest of my life, like couldn't be more secure. And then this buyout moment happened independent of anything to do with me. And I couldn't help but think that like, you know, maybe this is a moment when, I mean, I happen to have a very narcissistic religious belief system, which is to say that I believe that there's a God and I believe that he is very interested in the specific details of my life. And so this moment I was like, oh, well, this whole university budget crisis is because of me. Because, you know, God wants me to be a comedian. And this is what, you know, he or she or they decided is the tipping point that's going to get me to actually do it. So whether or not that's true, the other stuff is true. And I took the buyout, which essentially was, you know, not enough money to never have to work again or even close, but enough for me to interpret that like the universe or whatever was sort of conspiring to get me to do what I wanted to do anyway.